Hello, my friends. Hello, hello. How are you? Thank you for stopping by. Thank you for hanging out. Today, we're doing something different. Today, we're having fun. Today, we're checking out a new workflow. I put this together yesterday. And so I wanted to give it a try. I wanted to give it a whirl. And I wanted to put some content out there and ask you how you doing. It's been a day. It's been a hot minute. So I want to ask you, how you doing? How you holding up? How are things? Let me know what's going on. I have a lot of catching up to do. I have a lot to share with you. There's a lot of really cool things. I have some new updates I want to share about the show and what's going on. But first, my friends, I wanted to ask you about today's topic. Okay, hold on. I'm just pulling up something here. I wanted to ask you about today's topic. And I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts on boundaries? What are your thoughts on healthy boundaries specifically? This is something that is different and unique to everyone, and that's a common theme on the show. If you're new here, my name is Jason. This is the Outstanding Life Show. Here we talk about recovery, we talk about mindfulness, we talk about addiction, we talk about all things related to, I don't want to say negativity or the sensitive nature that comes around addiction. It's not something that everyone is open to, but I wanted to create a place where it's safe to have conversations and to ask things. And it's actually really interesting. There's a lot of people that will reach out to me, and I love the conversations we have. I love the inclusiveness, the approach that we share around addiction. And I wanted to expand that to include boundaries, to include having a place where we can chat, to discuss what boundaries are. And that actually leads us to, hold on, I set up something and I'm hoping it's going to work. Okay, give me 1 minute. Okay, what are boundaries? This one was fun. I set these overlays and these connecting bits up yesterday, and it's really exciting. I'm having a lot of fun just watching it work. Have you ever tried setting up something and then have it not work? That's that was my anxiousness, that was my nervousness with today. But I wanted to get out there and just hit the go live button. So thank you. Thank you for hanging out. Thank you for being awesome. Okay, so I wanted to share what boundaries are. And before we jump into that, I'm going to try something here because Facebook did this update and it doesn't work the same. Okay, hold on. I think I have it working now. If I click share, here we go, share now. Nice. Okay, so I shared it to the page. Sometimes that works. Sometimes it doesn't work. I don't really understand Facebook sometimes. But my friends, today we're talking about boundaries. Today we're talking about mindfulness. We're talking about addiction. We're talking about all things related to recovery. And so when it comes to boundaries, when it comes to setting boundaries in 2020, or oh my OMG, 2021, when it comes to setting boundaries in 2021, what are they? Boundaries are, in from a mental health perspective, boundaries can be, they can be huge. They can be something that allows us to safely have safe zones where, and I'm trying to be delicate with this, where when we don't have safe boundaries, that's another question later on. But when it comes to boundaries, these are healthy limits that we can set for ourselves and for others. And what do I mean by that? What do I mean by healthy, safe zones? Where if I'm a boundary, a simple boundary would be not letting myself drink coffee after 2 p.m. It sounds silly, but I know myself, I know my body enough that as I get older, should I drink coffee after 2 p.m., it's going to keep me up. It's going to keep me up and I'm going to have a hard time falling asleep. So that's an example of setting a simple boundary where by not consuming caffeine after, once it rolls into the afternoon, that sets me up for success so that I'm not staying up at night. Another boundary would be when it comes to people, places, and things, having a healthy boundary, having a safe boundary would be not putting myself around people, places, and things that, and we've talked before about triggers. We've talked before about what are some of the negativity that can come from those associations. And when it comes to the alcoholic mind and when it comes to the addict brain, there are people, places, and things that can trigger us. So having a boundary in place, it's almost like a roadblock. It's almost like a stop gap or an air gap where it's not something that's going to, hold on, let's move to the full screen here. So when it comes to, there we go. When it comes to the full screen, OMG, when it comes to having a safety boundary, it puts me into a position where I'm able to, one, recognize patterns, and I'm starting to appreciate where I am, what I'm doing, what I'm working on. And when I come to start recognizing the patterns and the habits that often push my buttons, and I don't know about you, do you have buttons that people push or things push? Or have you ever noticed you have a wave of anxiety? I got my shot the other day, and I always have this anxiety around needles, and I don't really understand it. But I know myself enough that in preparation to getting that done, I would psych myself up. I would calm myself. I would do the calm.com meditation for the 5 minutes. And then I would be open with the person that I'm speaking with. So the nurse that was giving me my shot, but I just told her, I was like, I'm normally a nervous person when it comes to needles. And I'm just letting you know, I'm feeling a little bit anxious. And the person was really cool about it. So in being open and honest with myself and open and honest with others, I'm able to communicate that and give the other person the ability to respond, to give the other person to engage and share. And because had I not given that opportunity, there could have been a different outcome. I could have been like totally losing my marbles as I'm about to get it. You know what I mean? It's probably not the best kind of state to be in. Anyway, I want to check out some of the comments, and then we have old games here. Hello, work it. Hello, my friend. Thank you for stopping by, Norm. That's really awesome that you're here. So if you're new here, my name is Jason. This is the Outstanding Life Show. Here we are talking about boundaries, and we were sharing about what are boundaries. And boundaries are really stopgaps. They're really safe zones. They're when it comes to the nuts and bolts of what a boundary is, it's a limit that we can put on ourselves and we can put it on other people too. So when it comes to safe boundaries, it could be identifying those patterns and habits in ourselves that lead up to certain events. So if I know I'm feeling anxious at a certain point, having a boundary can be like a flag that I'm, in my own head, I'm throwing up a flag and I'm like, okay, warning, yellow card, anxiety. When it comes to like big crowds, or what is it? One of my close friends, they get anxious around certain words. When certain words are being spoken, that can often be a boundary for them, and it causes them anxiety. And this episode is not about anxiety, but when it comes to breaking boundaries, that can often lead to anxiety. That can often lead to red zones. And that's what we want to avoid. We want to avoid those low lows, if you will. So when it comes to boundaries, these are safe places, these are safe zones, and leading up to that boundary, it's not a negative thing. Like, it's not a bad thing to approach a boundary. But what can be bad is when, let's say, we do have a safe boundary that we set for ourselves or others, and let's say we communicate that boundary to that other person. Now let's take it to a whole new level where we have, one, we've set the safe zone, we've set the boundary. And then two, we now move forward and we communicate that externally. We share that, we reach that vulnerability, and then we're putting it out there. And when we put it out there, and let's say the other person hears it and they respond positively, they start respecting that boundary because you've shared it. This is something that's particular to you, or it's something that's sensitive to you. Not all people are going to receive that boundary, or may not even be aware that they're breaking the boundary. So when you share that, that gives them the opportunity to respond or to adjust or to compromise. And this next part sounds weird, but this next part is really important, because when should we set boundaries? When is a good time to start setting boundaries? Earlier, I was mentioning about patterns and habits. And again, this part sounds silly. This part sounds interesting, but not everyone is aware of themselves to the point that, and this is where the mental health, mental wellness comes in, where getting to know yourself, getting to know your triggers, getting to know what sets you from 0 to 60. What are some buttons that people push for you that guaranteed push you to the edge? You know what I mean? Where some things really get under your skin, or some things really roast your chestnuts, if you will. And each person is different. What sets you off might be different than what sets me off. But there are particular things where, if these handful of circumstances exist, I recognize patterns in myself that move me into a different state, that move me into a different paradigm, if you will, where I'm putting on a different hat. And I notice there's a noticeable change. There's a noticeable change in myself. There's a noticeable change in my demeanor and how I show up, or how I present myself. And sometimes I don't even recognize, it sounds silly, but who I am. And when I perceive myself as I am right now, I recognize who I am, what I'm feeling, what my goals and aspirations are. And these things sound silly. But once I've reached that boundary, or once I've set a boundary, and let's take a step back. Let's say I wasn't aware of what a boundary was. And if I wasn't aware and I kept breaking those boundaries, like the example I gave earlier about drinking coffee, let's say I was drinking coffee all day long and I have a double. In Canada, we have these Tim Hortons, we have double doubles. And if I have a double, 5 p.m., and I do that every night for a week, for a month, I may not notice, but my state will change. My anxiety will be through the roof. I'll be agitated. I'll be anxious more often. And I might respond differently than I normally would had I not consumed that coffee. And I'm choosing to take that coffee in. Like that coffee might have made me feel warm, or it might have given me that sense of, I don't want to call it accomplishment because I might have a sense of satisfaction on the short term, but the long term impacts of consuming that coffee, by having that anxious conversation, by surrounding myself with people, places, and things that are not adding value, and by having these people, places, and things take away that value, absorb that. When things take away more than they're giving, when things are taking away more value than they're giving, that could be an example of a boundary that's being broken. And if I'm not aware of myself, if I'm not aware of other people's impacts on me, and if I'm living my life and I'm not even considering the impacts that I have on others or that others have on me, if I'm just blindly going through, I may not be aware that I have boundaries to set or that things are not working out the way I want. And I may not be aware of what's really triggering me. And we've talked before about triggers. And triggers are not a bad thing, but triggers are that event crisis point. Triggers are that point where we've now hit that crossroads and now our resilience has to kick in. That's where the growth and opportunity comes from. But there's ways to mitigate that. There's ways to help manage that before it becomes, before a habit becomes a problem. There are ways to help mitigate that and manage it. I'm not saying absolute control. What I'm saying, though, is there are times when maybe setting healthy boundaries could have prevented that thing from happening. If I'm consuming coffee all day, every day, if I'm consuming alcohol or other drugs, if I'm filling my life with toxic people, be it family members or friends, or if I'm going to the bar and I'm not, if I'm going to the bar, the chances of me drinking are going to be higher than if I had not gone to the bar. So maybe that's a place I shouldn't be around. Or if I'm surrounding myself with toxic people that are always taking value from me and never offering value, after a while I'm going to feel drained. And those are signs where, when should we start setting boundaries? If the outcome is me feeling drained, if the outcome is continuously me being, I don't want to say used is not the right word, but if I'm feeling drained, if I'm feeling where value is being sucked out of me, and it sounds weird to describe it like this, but these are real world impacts. These are feelings that can be the outcome of being around toxic people, being around places that are not supportive, or people that are not my community. And I don't want to say it's not a bad thing, but the hard part is when it comes to the if left unchecked. If left unchecked, this could be the great undoing. If left unchecked, if I consume coffee at 5 p.m., 7 p.m., 9 p.m. at night, not that it's a bad thing. I'm not knocking coffee drinkers who drink coffee at night. What I'm saying, though, is I can't drink coffee at night. I can't consume alcohol or other drugs. I can't consume negative, toxic people in my life. I can't have that. It's not something that's supportive of me, of who I am, of where I want to be, and or the value that I want to offer. So when it comes to when should I start setting boundaries, it doesn't have to cost. The cost of not setting boundaries is really high, and it costs a lot. But by setting boundaries early, by putting that stopgap in, and it doesn't have to be like full, like speed brake, emergency brake stopgap. It's more of the yellow card, red flags where, hey, I'm starting to feel a little anxious. Hey, I'm starting to not feel valued. Or, hey, this is a conversation where it's putting me in an awkward point and I'm not sure how to proceed. And these are conversations that we have with ourselves internally. And I'm not saying coffee is the derivative or the cause, so to speak, but the lack of a boundary can lead me to consuming things that are not adding value. It can lead me to surrounding myself with people, places, and things that are not supportive of my long term goal for myself or other people. So the risk of not doing the boundaries can be a huge price down the line. And that can come from, when I say price, I don't mean in the dollar value, but I mean in living with anxiety, in being high tension, in being wound up, in being filled with, I don't want to call it negativity, but I would call it resentment, where if I'm just giving and I'm being, the contrast of that would be like taken advantage of. And if the value from a long term perspective isn't being fulfilled or supported or watched, then maybe this is something that needs to change. You know, emotions are a sign of change. Emotions are a reflection of something in me needs to change, something outside of me needs to change. So if I'm starting to feel a little unsettled, or if I'm feeling unsettling, then this might be an indication that maybe a goal needs to change. Maybe something needs to be adjusted. Maybe I don't need to be around this person or this place or these things because they're not adding value. They're not supporting me. They're not supporting other people. They're not supporting the greater good. I don't know if any of this makes sense to you, but when it comes to setting boundaries, it's never a bad thing to start setting boundaries, to be able to have a second sober thought, if you will, where if I'm starting to feel anxious, maybe I need to have an anxiety boundary, or what part of me is feeling anxious after I'm feeling it. You know, if I'm feeling unsupported, well, what part of me is feeling unsupported? Or if I'm feeling uncared for, what part of me is feeling uncared for? If I'm feeling taken advantage of, what part of me is feeling taken advantage of? This is all coming from mapping my emotions and developing a greater understanding of who I am or what emotions I'm feeling. And those can, once I've developed a map that puts me up in a better position where I can use that map, that map of emotion, and I can use it to help create a new pathway or a new, I don't want to call it a driveway, but I can create a new path to drive me forward in a direction of progress. And that can come from having boundaries. That can come from having the idea to map out where we are, what we're doing, and where we're headed. And if something is not adding value, if people, places, and things, regardless if it's family members or friends, because there are toxic people out there, there are toxic, negative individuals. And that leads us to our third question, where what are signs that boundaries are needed? And I mentioned earlier, when it comes to boundaries that are needed, if I speak about it from a individual, like on a person, if I need a boundary on a person, this is where, and earlier I mentioned that I feel anxious around needles. And that's something I'm not sure where it comes from, but I know that I feel anxious. So when I shared with the nurse my anxiety, the nurse was very understanding and very empathetic. And she made me laugh until pretty soon I didn't even realize that I had already got, like, boom, I was already done. By the time I finished laughing, I didn't really understand it, but I felt, I didn't feel like my fear of needles was getting in the way of me getting my vaccination. And it sounds silly. Why would that? That doesn't make any logical sense. But in my fear and my anxiety, if that were making decisions for me, I would probably not even shown up. But I knew that I needed to get it done, and this is something really important. But if I were to, this would never happen, but like, let's say I shared my anxiety of needles, and then the nurse were to start painting a picture of like the biggest needle in the world, or to make it sound like worse in my head, or feed my anxiety, or make me feel worse than I already did leading up to that, Again, a nurse never does that. Nurses are amazing people. Nurses are the one of the true heroes of the last 12, 16 months. But when it comes to people, there are family members and there are friends who they will consume any and all time that you give them, and they will take advantage of that time, and they will leave you with these, I don't want to call it plaguing emotions, but these are emotions that are just rage or filled with anxiety or something that makes you feel uneasy. And if you're walking away from the conversation continuously and you feel that habitually, then those are signs where maybe some boundaries are needed. And maybe it's time to say, this is not something I'm going to deal with. This is not something I'm going to tolerate. And this is not something I'm going to accept inside my life. And so identifying our emotions is a huge step. Setting those boundaries, and this is more of a strategy where we're communicating those boundaries outwards and telling the other person, telling the person that is taking away that value, that this is not something that's going to happen. This isn't something that I'm going to tolerate. And when you communicate that's you sharing what's personal to you. That's vulnerable, yes, but we're giving the other person the opportunity to respond. And even if that person chooses not to respect that, at least you've communicated that and you've voiced it, and you're no longer going to accept that. Now, the next part beyond that is you upholding that boundary, you upholding that and calling it out when that line is crossed or when that boundary is reached. It's, I don't want to call it like when my cell phone when my cell phone data reaches its limit, I get a text message saying, "Hey Jason, just so you know, you've reached the limit of your this month's data cap. You're now at your limit." So when it comes to my boundaries being reached, when my buttons are pushed, and I've called out my boundary and I've laid that out, and I've said, this is something I'm not going to tolerate. Here is what I'm going to expect for the rest of this conversation from you, from me. And when we set those boundaries, yes, that makes it real, but it was real before we voiced it. And that sounds weird to say out loud, but by sharing it, by communicating it, that allows the other party to respond. And I would give them that opportunity. I always do. The hard part is not everyone will. Not everyone will. And that's a very challenging moment where it could be somebody that's really close to you, it could be somebody that you really respect and admire. But we also have to be prepared that safe zones, boundaries, sometimes they're needed even at the most highest relationships we might have. Because those people that we've taken in our lives or we have in our lives, those people, places, and things that were sacred before 2020 and throughout 2020, it's had a very different impact on everybody equally. So how someone responds differently to 2020 might be differently than how it's impacted you, but that doesn't change that you yourself have a boundary. That doesn't change that you yourself have limits that you need to respect for your own mental health, for your own safety. And if the other person, if the other place or the other thing is not at that point in their life where they're going to expect that or respect themselves or respect that boundary, then being prepared to move forward without them. Being prepared to either end that conversation or cut that place out of your life or remove that thing. Kind of like me not drinking coffee after 2 p.m. I mean, the goal is don't drink coffee after 2, but maybe I need to plan around making sure I'm drinking coffee before 2, like drinking coffee at 10 a.m. I don't know. Or if it's a certain place that's causing anxiety or habit or resentment or negativity, maybe it's my association and how I've mapped my emotion, or maybe it's how I've chosen to perceive the event. These are different signs of mapping our emotions, yes, but they're all a part of the same. I don't want to call it a tree, but like there's a flow that can come from mapping our emotions. It helps us understand who we are. It helps us understand what we want or where we're going. For me, boundaries can help pave the way. Boundaries aren't the overall end all. Boundaries for me have been a huge saving grace over the past 12 months, 18 months, or however long it's been now. I'm not ashamed to say I've had to enforce some boundaries, but for my own mental health, for my own, I don't want to call it sanity, but there's certain things that can come from having a healthy boundary, and lack of setting one can lead to very challenging events, very challenging emotional events, be it from a mental health perspective or anxiety or frustration or resentment or negativity. I don't have the mental bandwidth to take that on. And I'm not afraid and I'm not ashamed of saying that I have boundaries. But I want to take a minute and thank you guys, because you guys, you, my community, are awesome. And so I did this thing where I want you to go and check out the blog. We've got outstanding.life, and here we have the videos. We've got the transcripts of these videos. If you like what you're watching, please go and check this out. I have a lot of fun putting these together, and I hope you enjoy watching them, because these are really fun to put on, and I'm hoping that you enjoy them too. Oh, okay, wait, no, I think I did that wrong. All right, my friends, if you enjoyed today's talk about setting boundaries, or if you feel I've missed something, let me know. Put it in the comments, reach out, say hello, leave a message. I look forward to hearing back from you. You guys are awesome. You guys are really supportive. And what are some boundaries that you set? What are some boundaries that you've set for yourself or that you've set for other people? All right, my friends, you guys take care. You have fun, and I'll catch you in another video. Bye-bye.